News, and of course it revolves around the political or say a presidential term limit across the African continent. While Africa has become a key landscape for presidential tenure reform, attempts by several African leaders to overcome or abrogate the limits sparked or have sparked debates across the continent, yet permitting them to continue their rule. Though some African presidents are creating positive impacts, that is not true for others, as it has resulted in several military takeovers. Term limit evasions are at the root cause of a host of governance misfunctions in Africa and are linked to higher levels of autocracy, corruption, conflict, and the propensity of coups, as earlier on mentioned. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we shall be discussing the politics surrounding presidential term limits across the African continent, while posing the question, why the evasions? Thank you for joining us. This is Talking Point. Stay with us. If you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point over your #1 Pan-African channel. Today we're discussing the politics around the presidential term limits across the African continent, a topic that has sparked debates in recent times across Africa. And of course, we shall be evoking this with a season of panel experts in the course of this edition. Meanwhile, just to reiterate, you're watching us on 4U Television. Meanwhile, you're listening to us on 4U Radio FM 96.3, and we're streaming live on our social media platforms. So with me in the studio this afternoon is FABRICE LENA, who is a politician here in Cameroon, as he doubles as an international diplomat. Greetings to you, FABRICE LENA. You're welcome to today's edition.
Greetings to you, Sharon, and to all the viewers of 4U Media, to all Pan-Africanists, to all my brothers across the continent, to Rogers Kalema in Uganda, to Tashila Lungu in Zambia, to Anita Nesri in Zimbabwe. Greetings the young leadership of Senegal, headed by Bashiru Diomaye Faye and Ousmane Sonko. Courage to Masra Success, the preferred candidates for the Chadian presidential race. Hoping to see you succeed in May 6th. Greetings to all the young people across the African continent that are fighting for change and revolution of the continent that belongs to the youth. Of course, our continent have the greatest population of young people around the world, so we have a big role to play, and I'm just doing my own part of the job. I hope you do your own part of the job too. Thank you.
Exactly.
I'm always glad to have you to be your guest.
It's always a pleasure having you on this edition. Meanwhile, we equally take you to the United States, where we are being joined by Dr. STANLEY, who is a Pan-Africanist. Greetings to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Sharon, and thank my co-panelist, Lena, for also being on this platform, and to those who are joining us from around the world, and especially on the African continent. You know, I'm quite excited to be here, and I hope that we'll have a very productive conversation this afternoon.
We look forward to a productive conversation. So to kickstart with you, FABRICE LENA, you are a politician, like earlier on mentioned, and of course you are the center of the political systems in Cameroon and beyond, like you cited in your preamble. Now, in your opinion, what accounts for this decade-long invasion of presidential limits across Africa?
Yeah, the question of presidential term limit in Africa boils down to the grooming of strong men against strong institutions in the African continent. And this has been a long struggle of politicians that were born in the 70s and in the 80s. And by the time they were able to take power, are not willing to share this power with the younger generation. And then this has affected so many African countries. But to globalize this will be to to say that all African countries are practicing one and the same thing, which is wrong. There are some African countries that have been able to practice constitutional democracy and respect of presidential term limits. If they were to say countries that have been able to practice presidential term limit, we will talk of Zambia. Zambia is one because the founding father of Zambia with Dr. Kenneth Kaunda was able to accept a defeat in the free and fair election organized in 1991 by himself, and he accepted defeat from Frederick Chiluba and stepped down. And this foundation had been the foundation of Zambia since independence till date. You know, we also have country like Botswana that has been able to also practice this this perspective of presidential term limit and respect it according to the constitution. But the only French African country that have seen this also is Mauritius, the Mauritius Island. You know, Mauritius Island is one of the countries in Africa that have been able to practice term limit and respect of term limit of presidents, with President Kailash and President Amina Guri being those who have significantly shaped the country into respect of state institutions and constitutional term limit. Now, you will see that the propensity for French-speaking African countries to respect presidential term limit is very low as compared to English-speaking African countries. So when you want to do a comparative analysis, you will come to realize that the colonial culture of the French prones the leaders to seek to stay in power long and to seek to always thwart the constitution in order to remain in power. This is the case with Chad in 2006 when Idriss Déby had to maneuver the constitution of Chad so he could have a continued renewability of the presidential office. The same thing with Cameroon, my country, in 2008 when a bill was sent to the parliament, you know, to remove presidential term limit. And of course, we have seen the consequences of what this has done to the country with the numerous internal conflicts and the Anglophone crisis that is still ongoing, even though it may be underreported, and the series of socio-political problems that Cameroon is facing today. One of the major causes is this removal of presidential term limit in 2008. When we also look at this issue, is the main cause of the civil war in Cote d'Ivoire, you know, in the early 2000s, right up to 2011, between Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara. So in French-speaking African countries, presidential term limit has always been a problem, you know, and it's still a problem till now. Just recently, we are hearing of Togo going down history as one of those countries that want to also tamper with presidential term limit through a bill to the parliament to remove this term limit from the constitution so they can allow the president to renew his mandate for as long as possible. And this is where it's a problem, and this is where we, the African youth, will want to say that it is not the perspective that we are envisaging our continent. We should be able to accept as a continent that everyone as a leader have a time to come to the scene and have the time to go out. You have a time that you are inclining, you have the time of optimum delivery, and you have the time that you will be declining. So politicians in our generation and in those who are in office need to understand this perspective, need to understand these things, that they need to know the time to come in and the time to go out. Because failing to do so is simply manifestation of greed, is simply manifestation of bad faith and leadership of wanting to always feel that God gave the monopoly of leadership or management of institutions to you alone or to your political party, which is not correct. So it's a preoccupation for the continent, but it's also a perspective that we all need to look together as a people to see how we could find solutions to it. Of course, our generation is rising to say, let's correct the mistakes of the past.
Indeed, our generation is actually taking up action. Thank you for that brilliant preamble. Over to you, Dr. FONGOD. Now you listen to co-panelists. In your opinion, what accounts for this evasion of presidential term limits across the African continent?
I think it's more of a multifactorial, thing where we have so many things that has to be in place, and these things are already in place on the African continent, and we have leaders who absolutely will do whatever it takes to remain in power. The reality that we are facing on the ground is this, that you have all institutions that is supposed to literally negate things like this from happening. We have the issues of, a civil society. We have electoral reforms. We have regional corporations, all of which has failed woefully. And most of those who are actually running some of these, blocks by themselves have actually gone ahead, and instituted, no term limits so far as their own countries, respective countries are concerned. My question is not even as a result of whether we need to have longer term limits or shorter term limits or have term limits at all. My question is, when we start talking about the issues of democracy so far as the African context is concerned, we need to be able to make sure that we fully understand that within the African framework. And I'm also asking these questions, should it be that we need to start looking for other alternative forms of governance so far as the African is concerned? Should we look for, a collaboration of other systems of governance with our own African traditional systems? Or should we basically find what is it that work for us? Because the reality is we elect men who comes into office and they will do whatever it takes to stay in office. I think that my co-panelist said it so brilliantly. When you look at a country like France, France has literally made sure that they have those who will do their beating on the African continent, stay in power. It's either that or they will engineer coups and then they will take whoever was in power out of power. And when that person is basically placed in power, they will do whatever it takes to actually stay in power. So most often at times, it has nothing to do with the person who is in power trying to stay in power, but it's always Western influence as to trying to make sure that whoever is in power in Africa stays in power so that Western, capitalistic countries can actually be able to start harvesting all of our natural resources, with absolutely no recourse for it. So we have to start asking these questions. What works for us? What can we do in the meantime that will basically negate this whole entire issue where somebody becomes a pope on the African continent, rather than being a president in the country? Where you have people who basically stay in power for as long as it takes, and absolutely there's nothing anybody can do about it. We have to start asking these questions, and the reality is, so far as Africa is concerned, and so far as our individual countries on the continent of Africa is concerned, especially those countries that have the French-leaning ideology or French-leaning sentiment, even countries that are separated along linguistic, barriers, we are facing tremendous pain, tremendous issues, and we have to do whatever it takes to make sure, that we come into, we have a general consensus as to what works for us as Africans, and also be able to galvanize young people who will literally understand that we can't have 4 decades of, literally hoping that something will change. I think 4 decades is long enough. 4 decades is when boys become men. And sometimes in other quarters, grandfathers, so we have to do something, and we have to do something fast.
Exactly. It's actually time for action. Over to you, FABRICE LENA. Now you listen to your co-panelists. Back in the days, we saw kingdoms, and we still have powerful kingdoms like the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana, for instance, that has a king. But we saw this in the past. We saw the system of leadership in the past. Do we say that this system actually still applies to the context, actually, in the 21st century?
I do think that humanity is evolution.
Exactly.
Yeah, humanity is evolution. We have evolved from history, from archaeology, from antiquity to the modern day that we find ourselves today. And we are the product of modernity, of a generation that have its own realities, its own challenges. And of course, we have to say things that reflect those of our contemporary history. all around the world, including Europe and America, none of them came out to be the modern democracy that they are in today. All of them came from somewhere. At one point in time, they were also practicing leadership by kingdom, by some sort of monarchical arrangement. Of course, monarchy still exists in Europe and other part of the world.
That's true.
And in Africa, it is no different. We have the Morocco, that is a constitutional monarchy, you know, and Eswatini and other forms of government exist in Africa as well as other part of the world. My argument here is that for any country that accepts to adopt a form of government, the country should adhere to the constitutional dispositions of such a form of government, which is written by the people, because the people forms the basis of the social contract between the state and the citizens. So the citizens and those that the citizens have decided to surrender some of their rights to form the government have come to an agreement and say, hey, this is the document that is going to direct our actions, is going to control our actions of the way we would deliver public goods to you, the way we would deliver public policies to you, you know. And this should be respected as simple as possible. I am sure that if President Paul Biya had stepped down from presidential office in 2011, we will have less problem in Cameroon today. We will have less problem. That was just a document that people fought hard for in the early 90s to obtain in 1996. The Constitution of 1996, which stipulated that the 7 years presidential mandate had to be renewable just once, you know. And then by 2011, President Paul Biya was supposed to step down from power. And then if he had stepped down from power, Cameroon will have less problem. I'm not sure we'll be having Anglophone crisis. I'm not sure we'll be having the multiple issues that we're having today. No. If Yahya Jammeh in Gambia, when it was time for him to step down, and stepped down without making a lot of noise, you know, the Gambian people will not be going to the street to destroy state properties or to cause anarchy before he had to leave power. You know, if in Burkina Faso, you know, with Blaise Compaoré, when he had managed the people for 27 years, because after managing a country for 27 years, there is no way you are going to tell me again that you have not exhausted all strategies, all methods, all skills that you had to in order to manage the people, to step down and then let another person also show what they got. So if these people had stepped down when it is time for them to step down, their country will be stable. So if Botswana today is having the kind of development and governance index or democracy index that is having, which is even more better than some European countries, it's because people like Ian Khama, Seretse Khama, presidents in this country have set the pace, a good pace. If Namibia is able to enjoy what it's enjoying today with relative stability and democracy index, because here we need to make the distinction between a presidential term limit, the politics of presidential term limit, and governance. These are two different things. Yes, because respecting the term limit, it's the first prerequisite to evaluate the public policy delivery of such a president. When you have the pressure to deliver campaign promises to your people within the term limit, then the ability for you to work harder in order that your mandate gets renewed, it's better. And the ability for you to have it in the back of your mind that there's life after presidency also permits you to know that, hey, whatever thing I'm doing while I'm president, I will be held accountable for when I'm no more president. So when people have these concepts in their mind, they inculcate in their mind that there is life after presidency, and I could be held accountable for my actions after presidential office, then they will start acting rightly while they are president. If DR Congo, one of the most populous French-speaking African countries, with the leadership of Mobutu, Joseph Mobutu, and then later on Desiré Laurent and Joseph Kabila, you know. So Joseph Kabila, after taking leadership from his father at the age of 29 and managing this country from 2000 to right up to 2018, you see. And then at one point, he said, okay, I have to leave. You get the point? Yeah. But he also had the ability to do otherwise. This is where I come to say the leadership is, first of all, the will of such a person and the intention of such a person. So because when the intention is evil, when the intention is bad, such a person will want to conserve power by every means possible. And this is where it plunged countries to war. This is where it plunged countries to chaos. But when such a person agreed and reconciled his conscience with his own mind, with his own body, with his people, to say, yes, I have been able to deliver. I have made mistakes. I have made my own contribution to my country and to humanity. I have to step down. Then this is the beginning of what we want to see in Africa. It is an evolution. It is a process. Yes, there are some countries that have had rotation of presidents. Their development had not been reflected in such a rotation. It's true. There are others that have not had real rotations. Their development too have not been reflected in that. But it is better to have recycling of different presidents who come and go, and each person during the term office make their own meaningful contribution to the country, than to have a single person who hijacks the country and state institutions for himself and with a group of people for a very long time. Because leadership also at one point gives monotony and boredom. So when someone stays long, people just get dissatisfied because you have stayed long. And then, like I said earlier, people should know when to come to the scene and when to leave the scene. And we need to start looking as Africans how to harmonize the systems of governance in order to reduce the discrepancy between the Anglo-Saxon system of management and the I don't know whether it's Francophone or Franco-Saxon system of management of the countries. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's always good to leave the scene while the applause is still very loud. Now, Dr. FONGOD, you listen to your co-panelists, but with reality, or say with the context on the African continent, we realize that most of the African leaders might have stayed in power for some 18 years or longer, but then what are some of the implications, term limits across the African continent with regards to, say, the governance of every country?
I think the issue is that you eventually have a pool of people who are literally marginalized, from the political process. And the reality is that I think a very good example will be looking at the book of somebody like Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell is an African-American economist. I think he is the best of his class. I think probably in his 90s now, late 90s. I don't think that there's any other social commentator in America bigger or better than Thomas Sowell. He does his research very well. He has this book called Intellectuals and Society. The idea is that you have intellectuals, somebody who basically becomes very good at one particular thing. Maybe the guy is a medical doctor, specialized maybe as a cardiologist, or maybe, a head surgeon, neurosurgeon, or whatever be the specialty. Maybe be it in science, any other season in science, maybe, in economics as himself. But then most of these guys have the tendency to have these unmitigated goal to feel that they know it all. Whenever you have somebody who is in power, and especially this is some of the issues I have, especially with politicians. Politicians, people who have the tendency to know exactly how a government functions, does not necessarily have the skill set to be able to bring a government or to bring a country, out of the economic crisis, for example. You need to fully understand absolutely what is happening. And the unfortunate thing for most people who are in power is that they have this tendency to feel that they absolutely, without them being in power, the nation will plunge into darkness. The reality is there are hundreds of thousands of young people with the skill sets, with the capacity, building, tech companies all around the world, okay? Literally some of the best doctors in the world. For example, you look at a country like Nigeria, Some of the best surgeons in the world are Nigerians, even in the United States of America. I live very close to a particular city called Temecula, California. And right in this particular city, I know of two surgeons that are actually running a hospitals. And both of these surgeons are actually Africans from Nigeria. I know of another medical doctor. This guy is an oncologist. And this guy has a wait time of over 2 years. To see him, you must book up 2 years in advance before you're able to meet this doctor. He is born Nigerian, African. I know of Cameroonians, people like Ma Hobby. These are guys who have come up with great stuff, so far as medicine is concerned. If you heard about the FOBIMA procedure, you will know this guy is born Cameroonian. All right, there are great men, great women in all of these fields who are doing great things so far as the African continent is concerned. But they're not just doing it in Africa, they're doing it outside of Africa. And the reason why most of these folks are outside of Africa is because we have this whole entire thing on the continent of Africa where greatness is not accepted back home. Why? Because folks who have been in power will do whatever it takes to stay in power, marginalize those who have studied hard and fought hard, especially so far as our systems, our countries are evolving. I think that Lena just said something extremely quite powerful. We are moving from antiquity into the modern age. And the reality is, even though we are moving from antiquity into the modern age, it is not as if to say we are marginalizing and we are saying that our antiquity was not that great. All we are saying is that the world is changing. All right, the world is changing. We are now moving into the technological age, and we need to be able to have countries that actually reflect this in all forms, in all the sectors of our individual countries. And if this is not the case, the reality is that our countries will not just advance. So what do you think of somebody who is basically running the country who absolutely have no idea about the age in which you are living in? What do you say of a president who fully does not even understand the technological age in which we live in, who is making decisions and trying to be able to talk about integration, talk about cybersecurity, talk about issues of, bringing electricity, rural electrification in such a way that is meaningful, and yet they have no idea what they're talking about. Some person sitting beside them write this stuff and hand over to them, and they talk about it, and they absolutely have no idea, no desire, because where they live, you will never hear that lights went out. Do you understand that? I've never heard that in any presidential palace on the African continent, they went for a day without electricity. The idea is this, that we have leaders that absolutely have no idea about the plight of the local man. They have no idea about the pain of the locals. So they are ruling a culture, or they are ruling a nation where they are divorced of the realities of those who are living in the nation. And because we are living in the separate class altogether. And so it doesn't really matter to them exactly what happens in the country, because obviously nothing is going to bother them. They are doing very well at the expense of those who are in the country. And some idiots are also putting these men in power, and at the expense of, of their own lives and livelihood. So people are suffering while those who they put in power are doing extremely very well. That's the reality of the continent. My point is this. I fully understand that there are things that we need to do. I understand that, we need to be able to have men in power that fully understand the plight of the people. But what I'm also asking is this: how do we get to that place where we are actually able to help Africans fully understand that if you're going to be able to put anybody in power, put someone in power, just like Lena says, that understands that whatever they do, it will reflect on them. And after they've left office, they have to also deal with the consequences of the decisions they took while they were in office. I think that there's no other barometer to be able to actually measure someone's success than for that person to leave office and basically be out of office and says, you know what, I am extremely excited and happy because now I'm benefiting from the decisions I took while I was in office. If a leader will rule a nation and will push that nation into the path of prosperity, when that leader leaves office, then that leader will be able to experience exactly whatever their decisions were when they were in office. But if the leader would only leave office because they died like a pope or they died like a king, well, the reality is There will always be divorce from whatever decisions they make, because the consequence of those decisions will never meet them in the first place. They will never leave office. They will die in office. And unfortunately, that's the reality of most of us on the African continent. I hope that that's not our story. I hope that we can actually find a way in which we can bridge ethnic, religious, and linguistic lines, and find ways that we can create some kind of a federal system, especially across most African countries, so that even if the top tier, the presidency is not changing, but we can absolutely start talking about some legitimate change, which is measurable with real reforms, at the federal level, where you have a state government, at local government areas. In places like Cameroon, you'll be talking about provinces or regions. In places like Nigeria, you'll be talking about states like the Delta State and all of that, where you can actually be able to measure progress. And maybe if we can start talking about having some kind of a democratic, platform at that level, that might also be able to help engineer the change that we're looking for, at the top, at the presidential levels.
Thank you immensely, Dr. FONGOD. Speaking of consequences of decisions, we shall be coming back to that. But I would like to pick up from where you stopped, FABRICE LENA. Earlier on, you mentioned that it's important to respect president's short-term limits. You equally cited there is an interrelation between governance as well as president's short-term limits. Now, could you kindly expatiate on that? Because we are at a point where we have leaders on the African continent. We might not be able to say if who has the best interests of the African continent at heart, but everything we do is for the best of the continent. And now, in your capacity as a politician, you get to exchange with numerous experts on a daily basis. What do you think is some of this coexisting relations that harbor between these two?
I will come back to my analysis again. I said that it's important that the current trend of young leaders in the continent voted into office understand that they are carrying aspirations of millions of people.
Yes.
And Africa is one. Africa is one. It is the colonial boundaries that has demarcated places for us that is called country. I am a Chamba man. There are a lot of my brothers in Nigeria, in Taraba State. There are Chamba communities there, just like the Yoruba people in Nigeria. Yeah. The whole of Benin, neighboring Nigerian state, is Yoruba people. The whole of Togo and Ghana are the same people, So we are a continent with commonalities from country to country. And then we harness these commonalities by trying as much as we can within our capacity with the constraints that prevails around the political environment of Africa, taking to cognizance some of the treaties and conventions that our forefathers and former political leaders of our country signed with some other world powers and some international organizations, which is affecting us till today. We have to lead the politics of transparency. Politics of transparency is to explain to the people clearly enough with the simplest language our political agenda and the process through which we want to access power. When these things are explained to the people will wholeheartedly accompany us. And the people will understand if we found ourselves in the moment of difficulty to take double-edged decisions. But when politics is being mystified like it is in some countries, and then leaders deified, and there is no communication between the people and the leaders, and then governance become an issue of mystery, there is disconnection between the people and the leadership. Exactly. And when this happens, the people now start to doubt the politicians. So African politicians have a very bad name. And now this bad name is true and is false. False because we have had people who have genuinely come to serve their people. Thomas Sankara came and said, I have a revolution, a plan for Burkina Faso, and was in the process of execution until someone from within decided to hold him down. Patrice Lumumba had a dream, something to put in front of the people of Congo, and he was tracked down by his own people. John Pombe Magufuli of Tanzania recently in 2020 was executing his promises to the people of Tanzania until he was brought down. These are people that they have track record of the things that they have succeeded to put in front of people. So not all African politicians should be given the bad name. It's just like we always say, give the dog the bad name and hang it. But also, the African population, the young people should take their responsibilities. What are they failing to do? What are they not doing right? Because leaders function to the extent that they have evaluated their citizens, the population, to be those kind that can hold them accountable or not. So when the leader finds out that I have a very weak population, and then such a decision that I take to the interest of my entourage, or maybe some superpower to which I make pleas and stay in power, they will not ask me for anything, they will not call me to accountability, then they will continue being in power. They are not going to be disturbed. And this is the case with Cameroon. This is the case with Equatorial Guinea. This is the case with Uganda. But when the people rise up to that extent, then there will be the break from the government, and then there will be negotiation. So there is leadership, there is governance, there is politics. Politics is when elections are organized, political parties and politicians have to do the competition. Someone have to leave the cycle of citizens to become the manager of the state. Governance is the time for that person to deliver the public policies, education, transport, technology, agriculture, foreign policy objectives, national defense. Then we evaluate that person's ability